BioCentury This Week is brought to you by Icon Biotech. As a world-leading healthcare intelligence and clinical research organization dedicated to the needs of small and mid-sized biopharma companies, Icon Biotech helps biotech organizations meet their critical milestones and deliver data and evidence-based results to investors, large pharma partners, and regulatory authorities. Icon Biotech advances clinical research by offering integrated outsourced services and solutions delivered by dedicated biotech teams and management that understand the different pressures faced by biotechs in their drive to solve today's challenges without losing sight of their mission to deliver life-changing innovations tomorrow.
A new year, another year, hoping biotech can break free of the macro factors that have buffeted industry for the past few years. As we get ready for 2025, the BioCentury This Week team asks, can biotech set aside the exhaustion of the financing environment, policy concerns, and geopolitical tensions that have been hammering industry to deliver on the promise of innovation this year? We'll also take a look at the lessons U.S. policymakers should take from the rise and fall of the Biosecure Act. And we'll discuss a pair of neurology readouts. I'm Jeff Cranmer, one of the executive editors here at BioCentury, and I'm joined by
Simone Fishburne, editor-in-chief.
Selena Koch, executive editor.
And Steve Usden, Washington editor.
Okay, JPM is a week away, and we have just what you need to survive the week in San Francisco. It's BioCentury's handy one-stop shop for all of the events during JP Morgan Week from January 11th to January 16th. Click on the link at jpmguide.com. And if you don't see an event, there's still time to let us know if you see something that should be added. Okay, it's another dawn for biotech with JP Morgan right around the corner. And well, after the past few years, I must admit, I'm beginning to feel a little bit like the Bill Murray character in the legendary film Groundhog Day, where Bill plays a weatherman sent to cover that quirky American holiday that's meant to tell you whether spring will come early or whether winter will grind on, sort of like a biotech roadshow circa around now. Murray's character, of course, is trapped in a time loop, forced to relive February 2nd over and over again. And so it's sort of gone with biotech the past few years. We've felt like we're coming out of the bear market. The taps are going to open again in terms of financing, and spring will spring early. And as I finished up my holiday reading Simone's letter from the editor, that movie very much came to mind. Simone, what was your take as you were thinking about putting your thoughts down?
Not sure that Bill Murray's character went through a pandemic and then a few other things that have happened since then. But, let's roll with that one, Jeff. Look, moving into this year, thinking about what will biotech look like, my colleague Stephen Hansen has been out and about talking to investors in preparation for his upcoming financial markets preview, which everybody should be keen to read. And, I've been talking to people and I just feel that they're entering this year. What I would say is there's a sort of palpable lack of optimism. That doesn't specifically mean that there's pessimism, but to your point, Jeff, a lot of exhaustion. And so as I thought about this, I sort of broke down the way I'm thinking about where we are in biotech into sort of three different, not categories, but three different things to think about. On the one hand, definitely there's a lot of success and progress. And we recently, my colleague Meredith Durkin-Wolf published the 50 NMEs that were approved by FDA CDER last year. When you look at the numbers, I would actually say that 2014 marks a kind of division where since 2014, almost every year, only 2 didn't make this grade. There have been more than 40 drugs a year approved by CDER, not even talking about CBER. And before that year, going back to 1985, there were only 2 years where they actually exceeded 40 drugs, and every other year was less than that. So I think that when you look at it, definitely the industry is getting better at making drugs and bringing them to approval. And there were a whole bunch of new companies and new programs. It takes about 10 years to do that many new programs and new companies in the last 10 years. So you can expect that it's reasonable to predict that pace will keep going. And that's a good thing. There are various ways we've written, and we might talk on this pod about some other wins last year, really specific breakthroughs like immune reset becoming an actual reality and immunity and inflammation. That's the good news. There's another part of where biotech is right now, which you have to be honest about, which is that some things are taking forever, like precision medicine. Selena can add to this maybe. There's every reason in the world for people to be adopting the use of biomarkers to stratify clinical trials, and yet they're not doing it. And there's various reasons, commercial, logistic ones, but precision medicine is taking its time to deliver on that promise. And even worse than that, there's areas I picked out, women's health. I think that's a huge one, massive unmet need, and really just a desert of activity. So, you can have unmet need, a sizable market, innovations, and it doesn't really add up to progress where it's needed. And everybody knows that this year, all of the companies and investors are just going to flock after obesity opportunities. Everyone thinks that they're going to be the next big one, sell it to Novo or Lilly. It's going to be PD-1 and PD-L1 all over again, with everybody trying to go after the same few things. Some will make it and most won't. And
That's where those lemmings have been running off too.
Yeah, and that's a massive opportunity cost for all the things that they're not doing. And then I'm looking at my colleague Steve Usden now, because you've got the backdrop here of the incoming Trump administration. And in the piece I wrote, it's just littered with references to some of the things that Steve has been writing about. And it doesn't really matter whether you think it's a good election outcome or a terrible election outcome. I think everybody accepts there's a massive level of uncertainty. And, RFK Jr. is the head of HHS. I don't know if he's going to get confirmed, be an anti-vaxxer, bring fringe beliefs, but you cannot ignore that is a very real possibility. Got a new head of FDA and NIH being nominated. They'll probably get confirmed where I read Steve's writings, and they have good things or negative disruption. So those are just a couple of those things. And I think that where I ended this with is that part of this exhaustion is that everybody has lived in a world of certain expectations, right, for a long time. And I hear investors still telling me this. People in those boom years just expected that the money would flow and that they just had to have a good idea and they'd get great valuations. And they have not yet adjusted that expectation. And biopharmas and investors have just thought that they could play the drug pricing game forever and just tweak around the edges, but not really fundamentally change anything they're doing, and that problem would go away. And scientists have expected that no one would ever question their expertise or authority. All of those things just, frankly, are disruptions waiting to happen. So I think that we have to acknowledge, whatever you think about the incoming administration, I think it's just turbocharged some changes that are happening anyway. And people have to revisit some of their expectations if they're really actually going to make it, any serious progress this year in areas where they haven't made progress.
Yeah, Steve, Simone highlighted a few things that you've been watching, writing about. What's your take?
There's going to be a great deal of turmoil. There's going to be a great deal of uncertainty. I think that a lot of the concerns will probably end up being unfounded. All of the things that people are concerned about aren't likely to happen, but some of them might. And I think that the longer term trends are also going to be really important. What's going to happen with NIH? That's really the foundation for everything that happens in the biopharm industry worldwide, is basic biomedical research, and NIH is by far the largest funder of biomedical research in the world. It's really a big question mark hanging over that. I think there's some confidence among CEOs of pharma companies that they're going to get some policies that they think are pro-innovation, changes to the Inflation Reduction Act's Medicare drug price benefit, probably some kind of minor changes to PBMs. I don't think there's going to be major changes to PBMs. Another huge area of uncertainty, and it's, what I've said before, it's opportunity and it's also a threat, is what's going to happen with user fees, with FDA medical product user fees. And then there's the whole issue, which we can talk about, geopolitical rivalries, particularly efforts to restrict investment in China and efforts to curtail U.S. dependence on Chinese companies for a variety of activities. That issue, the Biosecure Act, didn't end up passing at the end of the year, but the issue certainly hasn't gone away.
Yeah, and that's something that I want to circle back on in just a little bit, Steve, as you had that brilliant perspective piece last week. Among the other things that we published closing out and kicking off the year, we did a piece that I quite enjoy. I curate it along with Simone and Selena, and it is our picks for big things that happened in the past year and our predictions on what will make news in 2025. This year, Simone gave it a nice headline, The Uncertainty Principle. Hello, 2025. And you can find this by clicking on the link in the show notes. Our analysts stuck out their necks to peer around the corner, and I'd like to toss it over to Selena to hear about what she's looking out for in the year ahead.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, well, we couldn't all talk about AI, so we split this up by areas of what we tend to cover more than other areas. And as always, I'm watching neuroscience. And after years of lack of progress and clinical blow-ups, I'm a little bit optimistic that we might have some drugs for Huntington disease. This is a high unmet need. It's a rare disease, but it's very severe and fatal. And among neurodegenerative diseases, it stands out because it's monogenic. So we know white patients have it every time. And you would think that if we can't solve this one, we're just out of luck. Like, we're not going to solve any of them. Like, this is the one that's tractable, right? Yet it's been very hard. And now we have this situation where we have at least 3 companies with promising early data, and all of whom are working with FDA, trying to craft path to accelerated approval based on a biomarker, which has not been done before in that indication. I think that's something to watch.
Can I just make a statement about that? Because I did refer to this also. For me, this kind of captures the biotech enigma, let's say. You have something that should make sense, right? It's monogenic. It should be quite straightforward to treat this disease or to find a therapy for it. And yet it isn't, because biotech is just damn hard and drug development is hard. And at the same time, this is an area in neuro where there's been nothing for so long. And then actually suddenly there's a spate of activity. So you've got all of these things mixed in with the expectations, the disappointment, and then you do have a breakthrough. Why this happened last year, I don't know if we know, other than maybe just this incremental ramping up, Selena, that we've been watching of investment in the field. And you keep trying enough and you get a breakthrough. And actually that's what happened with Lilly and Novo, with obesity, like trying and trying and trying forever. And then you get a breakthrough and suddenly everyone goes in there.
Right. So one of these 3 companies happens to be Wave Life Sciences, which, it failed a few times, went back to the drawing board, retooled its whole platform and how it does its molecules, its oligos, and is finally getting some traction with an allele-specific drug that it hopes will spare the wild-type copy of the gene. So that speaks to that.
Yeah, classic biotech story there.
So I think there's 2 things that are really interesting here, too. One is the fact that it really exemplifies how biotech has become bolder about the kinds of things that it tries to do. If you think back over time, biotech in its origins was really modest in what it was really trying to accomplish. And this is something amazing, trying to have a life-changing, a life-sustaining therapy for a deadly disease. And the other thing I would point out is that it also exemplifies the value of accelerated approval, because it would be really difficult to imagine anyone trying to tackle this indication if they didn't think that there was a possibility of getting accelerated approval.
I want to follow up on a couple of things there, Steve. So on the bold front, I sort of agree, but I'm also conflicted. biotech does some very bold things, as you've pointed out, and maybe that is the reason that net the number of approvals is going up, because there's more companies, and we know now from a different analysis we did that it's independent biotechs can take drugs through to approval. And so maybe at a net level, more are doing that and succeeding, and they are being bold. But the flip side of that is what I was talking about, what Jeff referred to as lemmings, with people waiting for someone else to de-risk an area. And so, they'll flood in neuro after other people start to de-risk it. So now my question to you there is, you referred to policy. Okay, and I want to bring this back to women's health, actually, where there's been nothing forever.
Yeah.
So to what degree do you think policy can shape areas that have been so underfunded or underexplored?
Well, absolutely, it can. I actually, by the way, instead of lemmings, the image that I have, it's like kindergartners playing soccer, where they all, the ball goes one place and everybody goes there, and then it goes somewhere else and everybody goes there instead of spreading out.
As a soccer dad, I can say it goes well after kindergarten, and I had kind of cute lemmings in mind, like the kind of fluffy ones, like in the movie Zootopia. But anyway,
so about policy. Look, it's obvious, that there are ways that public policy can incentivize companies to invest in certain areas, and then we're going to get progress in those areas. Lack of incentive in certain areas leads to underinvestment. One of the more obvious examples is antibiotic resistance. It's a crisis. It's been a crisis for some time, and it's obvious that it's going to get much, much, much worse in the near term. And very little is being done about it because the public policy incentives aren't there. And the really tragic thing is that it's clear that there are things that governments could do collectively to incentivize greater investment in antibiotic resistance, therapies for antibiotic resistant microorganisms. There are also clearly ways that governments could incentivize investment in women's health and other areas, and it's not happening the way that it should.
And just to add to that, we know that government policies related, help with vaccines.
Yeah, so basically, the vaccine industry in the United States was collapsing. It wasn't possible to bring vaccines to market. There was a vaccine liability program that was created that compensated people for the very rare but real tragic side effects that sometimes happen from vaccines. And that made it possible to revive the vaccine industry in the United States. It remains to be seen what's going to happen to that in the next year. That's one of these areas where it's entirely conceivable that the United States will be going backwards.
It really is a good example of policy, actually.
I just want to touch on a few other picks among our colleagues, and Selena, feel free to jump in here. I know that, we've mentioned cardiometabolic. That's Stephen Hansen's pick for remaining a big growth area. In obesity, he's looking for amylin to become the hottest target. And our colleague Lauren Martz, who follows the product development space, she is looking forward to early signs of whether T-cell engagers can replicate the effects of CAR Ts in inflammatory diseases. And our good friend Karen Tkach-Tusman, she is looking for more buzz for targeted protein degraders in I&I. Selena, any other picks jump out to you?
Whoa. Do y'all remember the opioid epidemic? Yeah, that's still a thing.
Yeah.
So this month, Vertex has a PDUFA date for a non-opioid analgesic. Mm-hmm. We could certainly use many more of those, and it will be interesting really to see how it plays out in the market, whether it sells. So here's something you have that it's no better than opioids, but it does about as well, but it will be branded, and it will be competing against NSAIDs, generics, and we will see.
Jeff, I think we also have to think about, if we're talking about this upcoming year, especially ahead of JP Morgan, what's the deal-making landscape going to look like?
Yeah, as we were getting into the pod, we were just sort of talking about news flow, and I was commenting to Simone that it seems to come earlier and earlier every year. Always curious.
But we'll see, because, I think the sentiment is that with a different FTC, with this administration, they may be more consolidations.
Yep.
We'll see. I don't know. I've also read a couple of things that some of the nominees there may actually also be looking at the role of these mega mergers and so on. So
That's right. It was what, 5, 6 years ago that we kicked off JPM with the 70 billion plus BMS Celgene deal. We haven't seen too many of those, obviously. But speaking of deals and our analyst picks, Paul Bonanos, a frequent guest on this podcast, he writes that looming pipeline cliffs will continue to stoke pharma's demand for de-risked assets, with clinical catalysts once again driving deal making. For my part, I'm watching the evolution of deal making in Asia. There was much ballyhoo over this NUCO model, air quotes there, happening in Asia that really energized a lot of companies and investors in China. We're also seeing an expansion of in-licensing deals for Chinese assets beyond the sweet spot of cancer. And one thing I'm looking for is, will India begin to move beyond its dominance in generics to seed a wave of startups? What needs to happen there? Any parting thoughts, Simone?
AI, come on.
AI,
Are we just going to be talking about what's AI going to do in a year's time, or are we actually going to have more answers to that question?
Well, we're working on a story right now where our colleague, Aaron Tusman, is profiling the different strategies where different investors are playing in this space and what they think the near-term opportunities, really look like. So stay tuned for that.
And I did like your subtle nod there to my favorite basketball player of all time, Simone, AI. And you also slipped in his nickname, which is The Answer. So kudos to you. And we're going to hold off on any more sports because we've got to let the Australian Open get underway before Simone really gets her wind in her full sails on the court, as it were. But other stories that we have in the works, well, since BioSentry was launched at H&Q, now known as the JP Morgan meeting by Karen Bernstein and David Flores, we've begun the year with a look at the catalysts that will be driving biotech, hopefully in the year ahead. Lauren Martz will once again return with that piece with a big assist from her colleagues, and Meredith Durkin, our director of research. Stephen Hansen, as Simone mentioned, will have the 2025 public markets preview. And what else do we have? Selena, any more up your sleeve?
Oh, yeah, of course. So our colleague, Danielle Gullivan, is doing a deep dive analysis of all the Series A rounds raised last year, not just like the amounts raised and the investors involved, but what the technologies behind those companies and what we can expect from them.
Excellent. Now, I mentioned a little earlier on when Steve started to discuss the Biosecure Act that we'd circle back to it. I think now's the time. Steve, you wrote that perspective last week about how U.S. policymakers should be thinking about this issue.
Yeah, so the background on it, of course, is that the Biosecure Act was not enacted in the last Congress. We don't know what's going to happen in this Congress, but I think it's a time to kind of learn the lessons from what the experience was. To me, one of the lessons is that it's what I postulate as a litmus test, what I call the Biosecure litmus test, which is in evaluating U.S. policies toward China or more broadly. The question is the goal to degrade China's life sciences sector or to boost the U.S. bioeconomy? And I say that because I spoke with a lot of people and I listened to a lot of people from the national security community, both in Congress and in the Biden administration, and they tend to take the position that the goal is to hold back China, to ensure American preeminence by decoupling from China, for example. And then when you talk to people who are in the biotech industry and the pharma industry, they tend to emphasize the importance of boosting American competitiveness. And I've come to the conclusion, I think that trying to disrupt China's biotech progress is both foolish and immoral. And it's foolish because the U.S. doesn't have the ability to prevent scientists in China from making discoveries and translating them into better medicines, foods, and fuels. And it's immoral because no one really has the right to deny anyone, and especially an enormous population like China, the benefits that are going to flow from biotechnology. So the proper goal, I think, has to be to bolster the U.S. bioeconomy and to implement policies that do that.
So how do you go about that, Steve?
So I have a lot of ideas, but one of the ideas that I have to start with is that the United States should stop shooting itself in the foot. One of the ways that it can do that is by reconfiguring the Medicare drug negotiation program so it doesn't disincentivize the development of small molecules for chronic conditions that primarily affect the elderly. We need to strengthen FDA and ensure its independence from political interference. We need to improve and to continue to generously support basic research at NIH. We need to enact immigration policies that attract and retain talent. Those are the kind of essential preconditions for a healthy bioeconomy. Going beyond that, one of the ideas I had is that what the United States should do is try to incentivize the development of a biomanufacturing industry in the United States. So how do we do that? I think that the place to start is with biosimilars and generic drugs, in part because public investment in those areas could reduce costs by expanding the range of products with biosimilar competition and reduce shortages that have had devastating effects on patients. There are no biosimilars in development for about half of the biologics that are nearing patent expiration. Increasing the range of biologics subject to biosimilar competition would yield savings. It would stimulate the creation of biologics manufacturing infrastructure, and that could serve as a foundation for making innovative products. So how do we do that? One idea would be for Congress to enact legislation that incentivizes domestic manufacturing of biosimilars. For example, by guaranteeing Medicare markets, by granting a period of market exclusivity for domestically manufactured biosimilars. And an idea I have also is to create a tradable voucher that delays the start of Medicare drug negotiation for a period and use that as something that you could give to companies that develop biosimilars. That would be massively valuable, and I think it wouldn't actually cost the government anything. There are other incentives that can be used to make it profitable to use advanced manufacturing technologies to efficiently produce generic drugs in the United States, and there's a need to streamline regulatory requirements for biosimilar development. The underpinning need in all of this, I think, is for a trained workforce that can provide the personnel who are going to be needed for a massive increase in biomanufacturing. And I think the way to do that is to create partnerships between biopharma companies and the government with community colleges and colleges and universities to create the workforce and to tune those programs to the needs of this kind of emerging biosimilars and generics manufacturing infrastructure that I think should be created.
Excellent, Steve. Well, I can only hope that as your neighbors who work on the Hill are shoveling out their driveways, hopefully they're brushing off Simone's path and driveway and sidewalk as well. They're listening to your policy prescriptions on their headphones. We shall see. Okay, let's turn to neurology as I teased at the top. We had a couple of readouts, one from Axsome, one from Neumura. The latter seems to have dimmed the prospects for a kappa opioid program after the company's first phase 3 readout. Selena, where do you want to start?
Oh, you know how it is at the end of the year when companies hold their clinical data disclosure until then. It generally heralds bad news, softens the blow a little bit. I guess I can start with Neumora because that was kind of a categorically negative one. And this was a program that was in a neck and neck competition with another kappa opioid program from Johnson & Johnson, both in phase 3 for major depressive disorder, a lot of interest around them. And of the two, there were reasons to think that Neumora's might have been the better molecule. It is more selective for the kappa opioid receptor over other types of opioid receptors more than J&J's. And of course, what that means is you can dose it higher, right? And in phase 2, it had produced a statistically significant effect on a measure of anhedonia, which is a symptom with a domain within depression that this therapeutic mechanism is thought to address most directly, whereas J&J's compound produced a kind of a numerical trend, but didn't reach significance. So a lot of eyes were on this one, a lot of needs still there in depression, and it's a big market, of course. And it was negative. They didn't see a positive effect on either the primary endpoint of the kind of overall standard depression rating scale or on the anhedonia endpoint. So they did, as you do, you try to learn what you can from failure, you slice and dice, try to figure out what's going on. And the one thing that they found was that if you split the population by males and females, females had what would have been, had the trial been designed this way, significant effect, whereas placebo performed better if you're just looking at the males. So it doesn't mean something, we don't know yet. But there are 2 more trials ongoing, so there will be more kind of data to look at over the course of this year. But the other question that arises from this is, does that make the prospects for the J&J program even lower? We don't know, of course, but that one is due to read out anytime now, so we shall see.
Right, and how about Axsome? They had their data for agitation in Alzheimer's patients. What played out there?
Yeah, well, agitation is one very troubling symptom of Alzheimer's, especially for caregivers. When patients experience a lot of agitation, it can sometimes even turn into aggression. That's just difficult for everybody. And in 2023, FDA, I guess you could say, in a way, it formally recognized the indication for the first time through the approval of the first drug to treat Alzheimer's agitation. That approval went to Rexulti from partners Lundbeck and Otsuka. And Axsome is hoping it can bring the second treatment option to patients, whereas Rexulti is an atypical antipsychotic, so it works on serotonin, dopamine, and a few other systems, and it already had a label for schizophrenia. Axsome's molecule works by a different mechanism, so it's not only hoping to be number 2, but it's hoping to offer a different kind of treatment. So its molecule acts on NMDA receptors, the sigma receptor, and a few others. Prior to this, it had already read out data from 2 phase 3 trials, and the complication. So this story is just a bit more complicated. It's like lots of trials, mixed results, so unclear what's going to happen. But the first 2 phase 3 trials, they were both positive. One just looked at agitation in Alzheimer's patients, as you would expect it to do. The other one treated everybody for a while. They withdrew the drug, and then they looked for quote-unquote relapse. Now, that's indirect, because in that first part of the trial, it's open label. Everybody's on drug. It's not controlled. You don't even know if they got a benefit. So when you see something, is it really a withdrawal, or is it just their next episode of agitation? It's a little unclear, right? Now, the company says this, has their arguments for why this is a solid endpoint for this indication, but they were going to wait for more phase 3 data to actually submit to make sure FDA, they have a stronger case with FDA. And so these new data are from another pair of phase 3 trials with the same construction, one measuring the endpoint directly and one through this withdrawal thing. And they were really hoping that if you just measure anhedonia in a blinded fashion in patients, you would get a repeat of that initial positive result, and they did not. But then in the withdrawal one, they did get another positive result. So now you have 4 trials, 3 positive, 1 negative. They think that totality of the data is good enough and that their safety database is robust, and they're moving ahead with an application.
Okay, well, another catalyst to look out for in the year ahead. Watch this space for our annual Catalyst issue and our public markets preview, along with the other stories that Selena teased. Next week, we'll be coming to you on JP Morgan Monday, and we'll follow up the week with a JP Morgan recap in a special edition of the BioCentury This Week podcast. Wishing everyone a successful and happy new year. Hope to see you at JP Morgan if you'll be in San Francisco. And a special thanks to Kendall Square Orchestra, which provides the music for BioCentury This Week. KSO connects science and technology professionals and other members of the greater Boston community to collaborate, innovate, and inspire through music while supporting causes related to healthcare and education.
BioCentury would like to thank Icon Biotech for supporting the BioCentury This Week podcast. To learn more about how Icon Biotech can help you meet your critical milestones, go to iconplc.com/biotech.